Ahu kaha, ahu maia, ki runga, ki raro, ki roto, ki waha, riri riri, hau paimari e. Fill us with vitality, enough strength, bravery, above, below, inwards, outwards. Let the wind blow, peace be upon you. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Judd. Do we have any apologies? I see we've got a couple of empty seats. Have we? Okay, so we have no apologies, but we do have enough for quorum. So that's.
Can I just mention that Brian Doughty should be here? He's in America.
Oh no, sorry, there is an apology from Brian Doughty.
Yeah. Cool.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yes, yeah. No. Brian had a travel commitment before he was elected, so he's in Canada. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? That will move on. Confirmation of the minutes. Have we all had a look at those? Okay, so do we? Can I have a second? Judd? Okay, so the recommendation is that the minutes of the Whanganui Rural Community Board committee meeting held on the 28th of June 2023 are confirmed as a true and correct record. Are we all in favour? Against? It's carried. Thank you. Public forum. Oh no, that's the minutes. So who have we got first up there? So have we got?
No, they haven't arrived yet. So we can move on to another.
Okay, so we had a application for the community grant fund, but they're not here yet, so we'll move on to the next item. Three Waters. Oh, we're making pretty good progress then.
Just send her a message saying that.
But we've got a pretty meaty one here, and that's Stuart. The rural waste sites review. Are you? Yes, please. Or around here, there's a microphone that's running.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I just first wanted to, I'll highlight the report in a minute. I just wanted to introduce to the committee members a new member of staff in our waste team, John Sula. John's been with us a month or two. John has a background, he has a waste background for a year, was with Waste Management New Zealand, managing transfer station in Lifton Street. And they were and still are the contractor for the rural bin sites. So we're glad to have him on board, and it gives us a bit more capability and capacity in our waste team. The report that you have before you is a report that went to the Waste Advisory Group meeting, and it's there in its entirety that went to that meeting. And it covers a number of waste issues in the rural area. I'll deal with the rural bin contract first. So the rural bin contract on page 26 of your agenda That covers the bin sites, 12, 13 if you count Pipiriki bin sites. That contract is up for tender. We're about to release or approve a new tender. I can't tell you too much about it, unfortunately, but to say, in essence, it will carry on as it is now. But with a new tender, we'll be having new bins at all the sites, and we also have the opportunity to replace and renew and rethink the signage at those bins. And also it's a good time when we're replacing bins and having either a new contractor or a existing contractor under a new contract to look at the sites themselves. For instance, in the River Road, we're discussing with Tama Upoko about where the bins are currently sited and whether they are fit for purpose or could be changed in any way, shape or form to help, especially in terms of aesthetics for people using the River Road, for instance. So I'm interested in we are interested in any feedback on any of the sites or any alternative sites that you may have or may wish to have looked at as we go into a new contract for those sites. So I'll mention that. The Peri-urban or the bag drop-off points. This is the one that creates quite a bit of hassle for us in terms of illegal rubbish dumping and cost for council. So there is not a contract for collection of rubbish in the peri-urban area. A number of the waste contractors essentially offer services in that area and people align themselves to the waste contractor. However, a number of roads do not have a contractor that goes up and down their roads. So we offer 3 waste drop-off bag rubbish bin collection points. One in Karakia, one in Kaimatura Road, and one in Brunswick Road. Karakia works very well. Brunswick Road and Kaimatura Road cause issues in terms of illegal dumping. What we mean by illegal dumping, bags that don't have either stickers, so that's the low-cost bin stickers on them, prepaid stickers, or things that are not rubbish bags, couches, fridges, etc., etc. So the cost of picking up those extra rubbish is borne by the ratepayer. And some of those costs are in the report. And you also have a number of statistics in that report about non-compliance and also a survey that we did in Brunswick. So as the report looks at and recommends is a new approach to the Brunswick site and also the Kaimatura site. If we deal with the Kaimatura site first, that site essentially services one road, Longacre Road. And we are recommending that the service provider, Low Cost Bins, and we've talked to them, actually provides a at-gate service to the majority of Longacre Road. And the rest of the road, which will be the far end of the road, will just have to get their bags to a less public place on that road. That spot is yet to be determined, but it'll be done in consultation with the road residents on the road. And then we would decommission the bag drop-off area that sits in Kaimatura Road, which is getting contaminated big time. So that's the sort of that's the recommendation, and that's the recommendation that is up on the screen. If we could turn to Brunswick Road, that's a little bit more problematic in that that has been there a while. It's a great site, probably too good a site. It's, again, a bit like Kaimatura, it's a bit close to town. Gets a lot of townies going out there to drop off waste. We know that the cost of waste disposal is going up as the levy at landfills goes up, so we envisage this issue will not go away. And it does serve a greater number of roads that don't have waste vehicles that go down them. So the catchment is greater.
Excuse me, Stu. Are these roads just too remote or too sparse or too sparsely populated to consider what we've been talking about in Longacre?
They are, in terms of their geographical makeup, they would be a health and safety risk to drive down for the contractor to stop, pick up rubbish bags, etc., then turn around. That's what the contractors have told us. That's not to say that some of those roads could be driven further, but some of those roads you wouldn't be able to take the current vehicles down, service, get out, service bags, etc., in a safe manner. On corners, etc. Most of them are open road.
Okay. What's occurred to me is we've got the photo of the Brunswick site here. All those bags have to be picked up by hand and tossed into a rubbish truck.
Yes.
In this day and age, I just wonder whether there isn't a better way.
I think there is a better way, and that site's quite a good site in terms of being well off the road. So it's not a health and safety risk for any of the contractors to go there. But it is a health and safety risk in terms of it is manual, and there is sharps and needles and bits and pieces bound to be in rubbish bags. We have been looking at an alternate to a drop-off site, wherever that site may be, such as like a bin that's in the rural area, for instance, which can be then front-loaded straight into a truck without manual handling.
And the comment about there's 80% non-compliance. It's almost to say it's the most efficient way possible, regardless of the stickers on or not.
Yeah.
And just do it as a default.
Yeah. Well, I think we can do both, because I think if you get a right site that's further out, that's less off the beaten track, for instance, and has also got some community buy-in, and we have a bin or alternative that is less of a risk of health and safety, I think you're on a winner, or we're better off than what we currently are. We're going to have less non-compliance and less worry about our contractors picking up from that site. That's the optimum. That's what we want to work towards, and that's what the recommendation is. That we work towards getting a new site, a new way of doing it, which may be the bin that we've just talked about. There may be other ways of doing it. And then we decommission Brunswick site and then go with the new site. There'll be a bit of angst for a while, because people will still use the old site, and we'll still have to have enforcement and surveillance of that site, but that's what needs to happen.
My other question is,
Can you put your microphone on, please, Greg?
Regarding there are lots of unofficial drop sites at the end of roads and such things like that. What is the contractor's attitude? They quite happy to pick up along at those points?
Yep, it's very happy to, and that's the workarounds for those roads. And I think we need to cast our lens across the whole catchment area of that contract and look at whether they're fit for purpose as well at the same time, and where they can get to and etc. But they are very happy to do that, and that's essentially what will happen at with the Longacre road.
Thank you. But going back to the River Road, whether that you're looking for the new bigger dump sites, will there also be space there for recycling?
We are talking to River Road, Tamaopoko about that. We've also got, as you know, a curbside collection service starting next year, predominantly in the urban area, but with the ability to branch out into the rural area with the contractor, and that is our intention to work through that, and it's our intention, talking to the chair, to bring a paper to to this committee next round, addressing that point.
Okay, thank you.
What, whilst we're on that subject, we do have within our waste plan an idea to, concept trial to recycling drop-off stations in appropriate rural areas, and that'll be part of the report to come to next round as to where they might be. So that is an option combined with curbside branching out further into the rural area.
I did mention that, it was at the last council meeting that the curbside recycling was given the big tick by council, and I did mention at the end of that meeting that it might be appropriate to now move on and see what we could provide to the rural community in that regard. And Stuart picked up on it straight away, so so that's organised for the next meeting.
Yes.
We've got a pretty tight schedule. Is there any other points you'd like to raise now, Stuart, before we?
No, I'm happy to take the rest of the report as read and answer any questions.
Okay. So, there's quite a big resource goes into the waste situation with committees and council. Are you on it? You're on a waste committee, are you, Peter? So presumably, when we get recommendations like this, they've been already been scrutinised quite closely by your committee. Okay.
Yep.
And I think Michael's on that committee too.
That is correct.
So
And
we do have quite good representation
Yep.
from our group on that committee.
Yeah. I guess one further point, if I may, is around enforcement and litter generally, and it is our team's work on to get a more connected approach to illegal dumping in council, from education, from surveillance through to enforcement, through to provision of services, and that involves connecting up a number of council officers and departments, so we get better at the service and also able to better report progress in that respect.
And we might be able to make more use of some of these cameras we've been talking about too.
Correct.
In regard to this. So that's quite encouraging that there could be a better resource available for the for compliance.
Stuart, are we getting any, has there been any prosecutions or anything that's quite public as an example?
I'm not the right person to ask, and that's part of it, I should know, and it's another department, but no, but what we tend to do is infringement first, so it's a $400 infringement fine. People, prosecutions through the court, and that's up to the judge, etc. Yeah, so to answer your question, no, I don't know, but that's part of the feedback we should be able to bring to you and will be bringing into the future.
Infringements have been issued?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, thanks, Stu.
Thank you.
I'd like to be able to put those recommendations now if we're all in agreement. So the first thing will be to get a mover, Charlie, and a seconder, Peter. And the recommendations are that we endorse the establishment of an alternative service for the Karakia road bag collection site and a new site for the Brunswick collection, and endorse the decommissioning of Karakia Road and Brunswick Road bag drop-off sites once the new services are established. So we've got a mover and a seconder, so can all those in favour? And against? Carried. Thank you, Stu and John. And we'll be hearing from you again next meeting. And so now we're going back to item, which one, Demelza? 5.1, Woven Rivers Charitable Trust. Leo, is it?
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm very sorry for my tardiness.
Turn your mic.
You just push the right button.
Is this good? Thank you.
Okay, we have your application here, Leo, so it would be good if you could bring us up to date on the detail.
Yes, certainly. So I work for Rivers Charitable Trust, a charitable trust organised to for several purposes. The predominant one being bringing down barriers to learning. We're establishing a what we like to call a living campus in Papaiti 673, not too far from the cycle bridge, which is also a farm. We have orchards, food, vegetable gardens. Some of the food from which has come to council a few times in various capacities. We have a grant with a contract with Whanganui District Council, receiving funding in exchange for growing food to give to the community, gifting, and sometimes koha basis, and recording how much we give out to try and measure impact there. The grant we've applied for, the $1,000, would be towards a propagation house. Currently we work with a very small, quite run-down one. The propagation house will be a space where we will be growing more vegetables and seedlings, some of which we'll grow ourselves, a lot will be given out. We did this last year through Whanganui Library, giving out seedlings, vegetables, and some natives. And also it will be a space where we host volunteers. We currently engage with the community, having many volunteers come each week. Not so much in winter, this is part of the need for propagation house, a covered space, a warmer space in winter. But weekly we were having 5 to 10 volunteers coming from places like people who also engage with the Kai Hub and land-based training, some things like that. So this propagation house is a way to produce more food plants, grow more food. It's also part of our spaces. An aspect to our spaces is that most of the working spaces in the farm are also classroom spaces. For example, we have a nursery, and we also native nursery, and we also have the garden. The propagation house will be a space where we will grow seedlings, propagate food plants, but also host learning experiences. An alternate covered area for rainy days, but also for specific food growing learning. Upcoming, for example, we have a multi-year rangatahi education program, similar to a week-long camp we ran at the start of this year. And if you're familiar with Te Kakano through Te Ranganui Healthy Families, it'll be a similar basis of kaupapa. So does that help with,
Yes.
is that enough description? I know that one of the requirements is 50% in-kind funding. We have probably already met that. We have $5,000 of resources already purchased for this build, as well as we've just been granted through Amplify Grant, which is Whanganui and Partners, $4,000 towards this as well. I have a breakdown of other costs which we're looking to cover. And yeah.
Okay, thank you. Charlie?
Yeah, thank you. That was part of my question.
Great.
Where is the rest of the money coming from?
Mhm.
So you've got $5,000 already. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, so the proposed propagation house, is a tongue twister, is $20,000 build. $6,000 of that is labour, the build, some of which will be our waged hours from the coordinators in the organisation, and some of which will be volunteer hours.
So it'll be a mix of paid labour and volunteer.
That's right. And then the materials is 14,000. We have 5,000 of this. 4,000 is already offered. If we receive this 1,000, that will be 10, and the remaining 4 we will probably just try and reduce our costs somewhat and reallocate from our existing budget. We have a fairly, I'm going to use the term nimble because it's in your application description of organisations that would fit. We're fairly nimble and can reallocate things as needed. This is a getting to be a high priority. This build, we'd like to have it built by November. We did stipulate it would be built by the end of September. Weather and other builds going on at the farm, we're able to push that out. But to meet the preparation for the winter growing season, we'd like to have that done.
So will you start the build before the rest of the cash is raised, you think?
Most definitely. We have already cleared a site for it. Foundations can be put in soon. We're not putting in a concrete pad, but things like that we would, yes.
Did you say that some of that money is coming from Whanganui and Partners?
Yes, Amplify grant, which we only recently heard we were successful in. I don't have the details of that in front of me, I'm sorry. But yeah.
What's the structure you work under in terms of the ownership of the land, and how long tenure have you got of that, etc.?
Yes, good question. So I work for Rivers Charitable Trust. The Charitable Trust is the sole owner of the farm. It's held in trust as a community asset. That purchase went through, I believe, in 2022, and the trust owns that land, so that's how we're operating on it.
Peter?
Yeah. A quick question, or could be answered quickly. What sort of monitoring are you doing, saying that the process is actually following the correct procedure?
Is that as far as the build goes, or the...
No, for the outcome with all these seedlings, and the thing you say that you're supplying the wider community, and that's why you're getting these grants. So I want to know how that is, or what method you are using to monitor what impact you are making.
So very specifically, to work for the Whanganui District Council contract we were simply weighing the amount of food we were going out, at times exceeding 100 kilos a week, which was pretty good. That was especially when apples were here. We are currently also developing an impact measurement framework, which will be for the whole organisation, but within this will be basically counting how many people come out to the farm, how many people receive food, getting written statements from people who are receiving food. Sometimes it's gifting to the marae, for example, and other times it's through people putting in an order, knowing what we have available, and yeah, council has done that a couple of times, so some precedent there for that. We're always looking to improve how we're monitoring these things. I haven't been involved in the development of our assessment framework, but I'm looking forward to it being rolled out and doing more towards that.
And not meaning to be sounding cynical, but you obviously, when you're growing food, you also have surpluses of food, and what do you do with that? And it was also there, do you grow food for your community, your own group?
So
you know,
yeah.
I'll let you answer the question, because
well, we have followed several models for how and why we produce food. For example, at one point we were doing vegetable boxes selling at market. This was always built in. This always had built into it feeding the kaimahi, the staff of the learning environment, and the immediate community. We've always benefited from volunteers, and anytime anyone comes to the farm, they receive food. We don't end up with much waste because all staff know they're welcome to go and harvest. So we look after. We supply food to the staff, people who come, volunteers. And the surplus is basically what is going out, but it's a lot of surplus. It's ample. In this way, it deviates probably from most models of growing food, which is with a financial incentive. Here we're growing what we need and some, and then making sure it gets distributed. The Kai Hub has been pretty amazing. At least 2 people have always been coming from Kaihub per week, and when there's, a box of carrots left over, they say, "Oh, we'll absolutely take it." And also the marae, which always has people, just their immediate neighbours and such. Monitoring for this is, again, weighing, photographing with people at times, and writing down where this is going. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Okay, so if there's any further,
Yeah, just one.
sorry.
It sounds like you're growing basically for your community, your environment within that farm, and the surplus is going out to the community, the wider community. You mentioned a marae. Which marae would that be?
Te Aho marae.
That's Jeffrey.
That's Jeffrey, Pango, and Deborah.
Right, thank you.
It's probably worth noting, when we tried the veggie boxes, that was producing, I believe, just over 20 veggie boxes a week for customers on subscription. They paid it upfront. We produce them. Then and now, we're still very much in a startup phase. Our capacity is almost always slightly exceeded, and our organisation is growing. And in the future, we may run the garden as a social enterprise. However, for now, we have the garden, it's growing food. And this, Kohakai is the program we call it, where we're growing food for gifting, has been a very beautiful solution to the fact that we aren't able to put in the dedicated time that, say, a market garden would. But a lot of food is still being produced and being made available to people.
Okay, thank you. So I think the process now is that we thank you for your presentation, and then so if you leave now, then our board will discuss the application. Is that the process? Yes. Yeah. So if you'd like to wait outside, thank you.
Yes, not a problem.
Our board will, we've got 3 recommendations, so we will be discussing and we'll be accepting one of those 3.
Sure. I was very brief in my introduction of the learning environment, but I do have here our annual report. I'll just leave these available to you to have a look at if it interests you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, so we'll open the discussion.
You want to move it first?
Well, we've got 3.
You should move it. You should move it and then second it, and then we discuss it, don't we? So that works. Then we talk to it.
Recommend. We've got 3 options, so it's a matter of. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
We'll
and
discuss the options, and then if it looks like we've reached a consensus, then we'll get a motion moved and seconded for that option, and put that to the vote.
just for clarification, will it be on air or off air, the discussion?
Does anybody have a preference?
Should be off here, shouldn't it? I would think it needs to be off here.
Okay, so we'll have to move a motion that we go off air. Is that the way it will work?
Let's just take a break for a minute to establish the process. So we'll just take a quick pause.
Okay, so we'll go off air for a quick pause. for Charlie.
Yep.
We'll start the discussion on these three options that we have here.
No, we're not doing that yet.
We're going to just discuss the options.
I think the advice I'm getting is that we discuss the options. Hopefully, we'll get a feel for which of the options is preferred, and then we will get a mover and a seconder, and we will vote on that option.
Right.
Charlie.
So one of my thoughts is actually question why they only go for $1,000 and not $2,000 or $3,000.
I can answer that.
They've only gone for one. Cool. The other thing that worries me about this is it going to all of it end up going to the right place? So some people are going to be putting their hand out and getting fed, and they probably shouldn't be. That always worries me about these things. We're talking ratepayer money possibly going to where it's not needed.
So my question here is that as full councillors, you and Peter, it sounds like they get significant council funding. So there must have passed the test to get that council funding. Have you been aware of it?
We had one situation where I said, how do you know, does everybody that needs it, is it feeding just the needy, or is the greedy amongst there as well? And the comment was, yes, there are some people who don't really need it. When we approved it, and I was worried about that after we approved it, that it was ratepayers' money going where it shouldn't be. How they police it, I don't know. But that's my only concerns I've got with this.
So,
I'm going to support it, but that's just my question.
yes, so remember there's the education role as well. So it is multifaceted. So thank you, Charlie. Any other comment?
Only comment I made would make is that it could be seen as they are trying to double dip, given that they've already got partners' money, they've already got, so all their funding is targeted around Whanganui District Council sub-entities and such things. Essentially, they're going to several funds within the same group. Having said that, I still would support this application, and in terms of the $1,000, Charlie, I think the guidelines suggest that the grants are up to $1,000, so that there's the $1,000. And the other one, in order to mitigate that that the money goes towards what they're asking it for, I think we should ask that the project be underway before they actually claim the money.
Elise, be delighted to have
Yeah,
your
just
comment.
want to add the policy doesn't preclude them from accessing other funding. In fact, it requires that they access other funding. And 1,000 out of 20,000 is a relatively small amount. And just to bring you back to the policy we're assessing this against is priority will be given to proposals which are consistent or contribute to the community board's focus areas, community partnerships, rural economic growth, infrastructure, community wellbeing, communication, representation. And I think they align quite well with those various focus areas, as well as the overall purpose of local government to promote community wellbeing. But this is for you to assess, not for me. I just thought I'd draw you back to the policy.
Thank you. The other point I'd make is that they've obviously passed the test with Whanganui and Partners. They've got 4,000 coming from that source. Possibly what might have been handy is if we had known that, and we could have talked to somebody there about the application. So they've been through a few hoops already to get the other funding. So I'm getting the feeling. Anybody else want to have a say now? I'm getting the feeling that we option 2, that we agree to the request for $1,000 to help towards building the propagation house. So possibly the way we might handle this is if I could get a mover and a seconder for option 2, please. Can we achieve that? Oh, that is the recommendation. Yep. Okay. So can I have a move? We've got Charlie and Judd. So do we have any further discussion? No. Grant made the point that possibly we wanted to put. Do we want to put any restrictions on that? Like have it started, or at what point do we hand over the money?
It does sound as though they're well on the way, so I'm happy to support. I'm comfortable with it. I was just trying to point out a way of mitigating that risk.
I quite like what Grant said about having it started before the money's paid over. That's just my view.
So are we? So the question here is: do we put that motion or that recommendation as it's up there, or do we add anything?
I think there would be a lot of trouble to put a motion
Yeah.
with a restriction on it. I think we should approve this or not on the recommendation.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
So the feeling I'm getting is that
Just to add, in our policy, all recipients are required to enter into an agreement with the board to outline terms and conditions of the approved grant or contract of service. So I don't think it's necessary to put it into this recommendation
So we cover it
because we
anyway.
covered in our policy. And at completion of the project, they must provide a report no later than 3 months after completion of the project. So there's a report back requirement already built into the policy. So I think we're covered here.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're at the point where we have this recommendation and it's been, we've got Charlie and Judd. So I shall put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Against? So that is carried. Thank you. Woven Rivers Charitable Trust will get our $1,000. Yes, thank you. Okay, so who's what- okay, and we're going to Catherine. Catherine, so item 5.2, Three Waters update.
We'll just let Leo know that he's got it.
Yeah. I think there's something going through the House of through Parliament today, isn't there, on Three Waters?
You're ahead of the game, and firstly, my apologies to you all. You made swift progress through the agenda, far swifter than I anticipated. Demelza, there was some slides I shared. Did you have those? So, kia ora, I'm Catherine Stewart. I'm the Three Waters Transition Manager here at the Council. I've been in post for since about March. And my role is to sort of wrap a program approach around all of the work that's happening across council in relation to the Three Waters reform. So both the work that we are doing around supporting our staff and making sure that they are ready for the transition in the event of it going ahead. And likewise giving some time and attention to the kind of what does the organisation look like after that transition point. So it's quite a big piece of work. It kind of cuts across all sorts of pieces of the organisation, and it's very much focused on kind of risk management and looking after people and looking after the sort of the community and the organisation as a whole. The purpose of today is for me to give you an update. I understand through colleagues that you are keen to hear an update. There's been some reporting to Council and to Strategy and Policy Committee in the last few months as we've sort of hit some quite big milestones. And as you alluded to, the fourth piece of legislation that was introduced in June, which I will come on to shortly, but that has passed in the House today. And I think it is fair to say that the government will meet their deadline of passing all 4 pieces of legislation before they rise for the election. So that's been a swift progress in the last couple of weeks. If it's all right with you, I will sort of give you a bit of an overview of where everything's at. My apologies if you've heard some of this before or it's very familiar, and then I will take any questions. And if you do have anything as I go through, please do just jump in. And if I have to take anything away, I will do that as well, if that's okay. Cool.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Can you move me on? So covered all of that. So just to sum up, as I said, back in April, the government announced a policy reset in relation to their 3 waters or affordable water reform. And there was 2 intentions behind that. One was to give more voice and control to councils, and sort of the second part was making sure that no district was left behind across the country. And so the key changes around that you're probably familiar with. It was a shift from the 4 large water entities to 10. They were broadly based on existing regional boundaries. And rather than a single big bang approach, there would be a staggered approach to go live dates. So they would each go live on a different financial year quarter date. You could have multiple ones on the same quarter, but essentially everyone would go on a financial year quarter between the 1st of July and the 1st 24 and 26. The crucial change that came through very quickly was that Auckland would still go live on that 1st of July date. And the other 9 would be set by the Minister through a legislative instrument called an Order in Council after all the legislation was passed. The other big change was that every territorial authority would be represented on the regional representative group of the entity, together with an equal number of mana whenua representatives. And there was the introduction of community priority statements, which let any community group that has a sort of interest in a body of water inside their entity's area to make a presentation to the regional representative group about their priorities for that area. There was also some bits around the voluntary merger of 2 or more entities once they're established. And from a kind of technical finance point of view, there were a number of clauses in that bill when it came through, that's bill number 4, that related to the long-term plan and finances, because the crucial thing for us was that rather than 3 waters leaving at the end of a financial year and the start of a 10-year plan, which would have been very convenient, we now have to keep it in for up to the first 2 years of the long-term plan. So the work that I'm doing is very connected with the work that Elise and her team and others are doing around the long-term plan, whether there's intersections between the 2 and there's the effect of one and picked up in the other. And then the final thing was that the government removed the second tranche of Better Off funding. So we have tranche 1 of Better Off funding, which the projects are sort of underway, and that's just shy of $6 million, but that second tranche that the government had said that all councils would share in is basically removed. We'd fortunately not committed to spending any of it before we were awarded any of it, but that was taken away and I think is basically being used to fund this slightly longer period. Could you... So this is just where now we were formerly Entity B and now we're in something called Entity E. But basically it's the pale pink purple blob in the middle that looks an awful lot like the Horizons boundary. And you can see the other 9 and how they've been carved up. The crucial thing that was a little bit different for us is all of the other regions and the new entities fell inside the existing boundaries of a previous entity, whereas we are 3 local authorities from what was Entity B and 3 that were in Entity C, and so we're sort of melding ourselves together, and that's sort of leaving us playing catch up a little bit on mainly the ways of working together as much as anything. I think everything's moving through though. So if you can move me on. So the council's position, we remain opposed to the policy overall, but support that change to 10 entities and the regional representative groups and the priority statements because they improve local voice, and that's something we'd advocated for. So it was a move in the right direction. And when we submitted to the select committee on that 4th piece of legislation, we asked for it to be the the entity to be organised in a way that meant that we kept highly skilled managerial and technical jobs in the Whanganui area and the wider district. We also asked for some things that we knew weren't in the Select Committee's gift, but one was around capital funding for the wastewater treatment plant at Palmerston North, where we know that that's going to be a large cost in the future, and then additional funding to meet the extra costs of the delay and minimise the impact on ratepayers, and then really stressing to the government and the DIA the need for them to be engaging directly with iwi and hapu, because we have some real concerns that they're not sort of reaching the right people and bringing them in good time. And so we've covered a lot of this at the start in terms of the update on legislation. The Select Committee, when it did report back on that fourth piece, did pick up two of our asks in relation to the Minister's powers in relation to shared services and greater voice for kind of community, for councils in setting the eventual date. And the key thing that the Select Committee asked was that the establishment dates need to be set within 6 months of the bill gaining royal assent. So the clock is now ticking. No, it's not, because we haven't got to royal assent. The clock will shortly be ticking on that. And they also made a very sort of minor but important clarification, which is that the regional representative group must have at least one representative per council, because there was a bit of ambiguity in the wording where you could have had a rep but only one person representing a number of councils. So I think that is a helpful clarification. And then the big things were around, that got the news headlines, were retention payments for staff. Those aren't mandatory, it's a clause that enables them to happen if the entities in the future want to make them. And some things around merging entities into the future. So it's now specified that any future mergers have to be of two neighbouring entities. You can't merge the Northland entity and the Canterbury entity and have them function, which I think instinctively makes sense, but is perhaps useful to have that protection in legislation. And if we move on, so the things that we're working on at the moment is just sort of work with our neighbours around, with CEs, iwi and elected members and the National Transition Unit around the most appropriate date to transition. There's sort of an emerging consensus around that sort of mid to late 2025 position, agreeing how we'll work with our neighbours to prepare for that transition, and agreeing with the NTU how we'll work with them. And then also have been tasked by politicians and CEs on their behalf with developing a kind of plan B to mitigate the risk of further change in policy after the election. So if National form the next government and do repeal and replace the Act, what do we as individual and collective councils want to do around that? Because the financial impact of waters staying in our plans is great. And then, as I say, that current piece of work around making sure that the Three Waters reform work is really integrated with the long-term plan process and other bits of organisational planning. So very happy to take questions, and as I say, we'll do my best to answer them, but if they are too technical, I may take them away and come back to you.
Grant.
Thanks, Catherine. From a rural community perspective, what are the major impacts you see on the rural community, apart from population scenario, as far as we're involved in the whole district?
I have a feeling I'm going to come a cropper here, and I'm going to show that I have not enough knowledge of the rural community landscape. I think, broadly speaking, my understanding is we don't have any mixed-use rural water schemes, and that is one of the key things that the NTU has been focused on. I know that's the kind of the big tricky bit. So for councils who do have those mixed-use schemes, that's been really challenging. So I've sort of not got under the hood of that because I don't think it applies to us. I think, broadly speaking, if if you're connected to supply and you are paying water rates already, yes, there will be change around that because your supply will then be managed by a different entity and you will pay that money essentially to a different entity that's not the council, but the sort of the principles there remain. I suppose this is to turn it back to you guys and tell me what you think the key concerns and worries are, and I can either address them now or go and find out more. That would.
I guess the peri-urban rural community in some ways is connected to the wastewater system, sorry, to the stormwater system.
Yeah.
And the status of the water schemes that are currently run by council, whether they would be absorbed into the three waters.
Yeah. So
Structure.
all three waters transfer: storm, waste, and drinking water. There are, as I understand it, there is a piece of work about to start at a quite technical level where the information that we've provided to the NTU around all of our assets across all three classes, they've developed an analysis tool particularly for stormwater, which looks at the kind of the assets that are a bit tricksy, where everyone's really aware that we have some stormwater assets that sit in roads or are in parks, or even, to be kind of really blunt, where we have a park that for the 2 days of the year when it rains that heavily, it's essentially an attenuation pond, and then for the rest of the year it's a sports pitch. So it kind of identifies those ones and then works out how they're going to be managed. So for something like that, we'd be like, no, that's mostly sports pitch. That will stay with us. But we will, say theoretically, be like, yes, it's also still part of the stormwater network in terms of how we expect it to be used. And then vice versa, there might be some things where we're like, oh no, that is mostly stormwater. You guys can have that, but we still want it to be maintained as a reserve or as a something with public access. So there's that kind of piece of work, that detail is just beginning to be worked through. And in terms of, there is some stuff in, I think, the second bill, which I'd be happy to give you a summary of, where there's around stormwater in particular, where those assets run across private land, which is probably quite relevant, I think, to rural communities, which are around access to those and responsibilities around maintenance and work to them, which I'd be happy to send you a summary of if that sort of sounds a bit like the kind of information you'd like to have.
Thank you. And one other sort of nitty-gritty question is there a proposal to balance the issues of, for example, the Palmerston North wastewater plant? Will we be paying for the Palmerston North wastewater plant is the question, I guess, as an example.
So the funding and pricing plans are yet to come forward, and there is scope within all of the bills for the water service entities within those funding and pricing plans to cross-subsidise, essentially. The kind of principle behind this reform is about getting the scale so that everybody sort of pays less. So, yes, that was one of the reasons for that request of a capital upfront, because it felt unfair that there was now less people doing that in a smaller entity than when it was in a bigger entity C. But that is probably just the political reality, and that's sort of outside of my remit to comment on further. I think people will have views either way. But I think it's worth reminding ourselves that likewise Palmerston North will be helping us to pay off all of the debt that we have in relation to water infrastructure, and that there was a paper at council last week around the sort of cost around our stormwater and infrastructure as well, and so into the future that would be shared with Rangitikei, Ruapehu and Palmerston North as well. So I think everyone's going to have sort of swings and roundabouts at some point, but as I say, there's a sort of political dimension to that and also a long-term view.
Thank you.
The concern I had, and I raised this with Mike Femore some time ago, was if our Whanganui District Council loses a big chunk of the infrastructure which it administers, we're going to be left with a more expensive overhead than necessary by losing the water, and therefore potential increased costs for the ratepayers, of which our rural people are significant. So, but I'm sure there's a lot of work going on to ensure that doesn't happen. So are you able to comment on that?
Yes, although it will be a fairly brief comment. So I think you're meaning this sort of idea of stranded overheads, so where we have
Yes.
kind of HR or accounting staff and bits and pieces. Yes, that work is at its quite early stages. It is very tied up with the long-term planning process as well, because obviously it is about what do we look like in years 2 and 3 of that long-term plan. But I think that is a really high risk on my risk register, and it's an issue that we're working through, kind of, as I say, at the early stages, but working out how it fits and what the it's part of that bigger conversation of what does the organisation need to be doing
Yes.
in years 1 to 10 of the
I
long-term
think
plan.
that issue is one that our group needs to be keeping an eye on.
Yeah.
I think is my point.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a tight schedule today, so if.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, Bill.
Thanks for that. Hello, Catherine. I live out at Fordell. It's a village about 12k that way.
Just past my house.
Oh, all right. And towards the end of last year, we had a public meeting about our water scheme.
Yep.
And what came out of that meeting was that we would henceforth get our water from town. And there was some piping laid, and I believe the piping was paid for by part of that 6 million. But that seemed to have come to a halt, and we don't have any water from town, and it doesn't seem to have been any more work. I gather there must be some work to go on at Okoya, because I believe that's going to be a sort of relay station. But that doesn't seem to, nothing seems to have happened.
That is outside of my remit, but I will take it away to follow up with colleagues in the water team to find out what the status of that project is. The thing I do know is that it isn't funded from the Better Off Fund. That is funding different projects, but there was an earlier round of funding which also came from the DIA in relation to Three Waters, and was inconveniently also $6 million or thereabouts, and I think it was from that fund that work might have been being funded from. But I will go away and speak to colleagues and let the group know.
Thank you.
No
And
problem.
Okay.
the sort of sticky point about this is that we were given some sort of costings at that meeting, and I'm pretty sure that we're paying the rates for the water from town that we're not getting.
I will
Okay,
pass that back as a concern as well.
that might be something that we'll have to follow up on as a board, Bill. That'll be outside the Three Waters discussion, but it sounds like something we better chase up. So perhaps you and I and Demelza had better get onto that.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. That
You're
was
welcome.
extremely informative.
Not a problem. Happy to take any
So
questions.
we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation that the 1 and 2. Okay, thank you. So we all in favour of that recommendation?
Yep.
It was Peter. All in favour, aye?
Aye.
Against? Thank you.
Just on your question.
So now we move on to item 5.4, and we've got Damien here. Thank you, Damien. We're very pleased to see you because, as you know, we've been your role's been empty for quite a while. You must have had a lot of catching up to do.
And then just backflow through the pipes. That's my understanding.
Okay, so rather than the some of the previous reports that the roading activity have presented to the Rural Community Board, I've taken the opportunity this time to use the same report format that I've been using to council committees. So Mr. Roscombe, Mr. Anderson will be familiar with the style of this report. So it's meant to be short and concise.
Yes, that was.
With just a few of the highlights. So I'll take the report as read, but I'll just highlight a few of the key things in there. So the activity RAG status, or red, amber, green status, just is there as a indicator to show green, obviously everything's all good. Orange is probably something to consider, and red sort of an issue that we're going to highlight to you. So just going through those, the emergency works has been highlighted in there as an overall risk and or an overall status red and an overall cost red. Obviously there's in the last financial year there was a lot of emergency work events that occurred, and we suffered as a result of that through our budget lines. So costs have blown out in terms of the budget for that area, and that's been managed through the District Council and Whakamutunga. So wherever possible, we've applied for as much funding as we can from Whakamutunga, and councils contributed the council share of that. That's why that's in there. There's still some pretty significant projects sitting out there that need to be done, wrapping up of Culvert 49 at the Karakia, and the dropout on Somparade. Somparade's in the urban area, but the Karakia culvert is definitely a matter of rural interest.
It's been a problem for just about the entire time that I've been on the Rural Community Board.
So the low cost, low risk is listed in there as a as amber in the schedule, and that's just because we're in the last year of our National Land Transport Program, and it's just highlighting we've got quite a few projects to go through. In terms of the rural area, it's mainly around drainage and resilience projects, and that we have the works programmed. It's simply in there to say it's the last year of funding, so we need to get them done this year. Footpath renewals is only in there as orange, purely to highlight for Mr. Ashworth the recent footpath condition assessments that were undertaken district-wide and related to footpaths. The majority of our footpaths are in the urban area, and there's some footpaths at Fordell Rural Settlement, hence why they're in the report here. Overall, we recorded over 12,000 faults that were graded between severity 3 and severity 5. Severity 3 to 5 is where there's a problem that needs to be addressed. So at the moment we're working through prioritising the severity 5s so we can actually deal with those on a level. I believe some of those severity 5s may be located in Fordell, which is probably not a surprise. Other than that, my report goes on to describe the progress in the previous reporting period, so the last quarter, and then just provide you with a general update of the activities planned for the next reporting period. I will highlight our top risks still remain in material and labour price increases that we're still experiencing, and the availability of key consultants and personnel for detailed design work. Also draw attention to the maintenance budget allocated from Whakamutunga and the Whanganui District Council being sufficient to maintain the current levels of service. This is an area that is of a risk to us. We are reliant on next LTP and NLTP processes to increase the level of funding from both those funding partners so that we can deliver the required programs of work. If the funding isn't forthcoming, the levels of service that we can provide and the services that we can provide in general would be affected. Forestry impact is still a major player for us in terms of our cost and our budgets. The latest one is Longacre Road, where we're experiencing quite a bit of significant damage there, and there's a fairly substantial pavement rehabilitation cost that's required to maintain that as a sealed road. Final risk is around just increased compliance, consenting and regulatory costs that seem to be facing us all. Other than that, I will take any questions. I realise I haven't covered the last page, but I am also conscious that you are short on time, so I'm happy to focus on your questions. Thank you.
Hopefully we can get you back. Judd.
Yeah, kia ora Warwick. It was quite a succinct delivery. My concerns are rural road maintenance assessments, especially around the Marybank region. How often are those roads assessed, or how does someone bring road needs to your attention or to your office's attention?
Yeah, so normally I think the assessments go through 6 to 12 monthly. If issues raise up in the meantime, then they can be logged straight through the council's main call centre. Just they get registered as a CRM process, and we will have staff investigate those. If there's a callback required, we can give you a call back and have a wider chat about it. Or if it's a matter that you wish to raise as community board directly with myself, I'm quite happy to get the emails, and
Excellent.
we can see out the time to meet, or we can do whatever.
We can certainly do that. The other was Marybank's, their footpath. I've been called out there a couple of times to come and have a look at it, measured it up. It's certainly an issue. The footpath of concern is the one leading down to the main road. It seems maybe it seems a relatively easy fix, a strip of concrete in between to join them. However, as you say, you are busy. I've flagged it several times. How do we get some pressure on it?
I can see where it sits in terms of our priority list. We've got several aspects of the footpath that we're looking to prioritise. Where we've got repairs to do, we're using the severity report to indicate which ones we need to prioritise on a limited budget. So we do those ones first. Where there's missing sections of footpath, we're looking at also prioritising those with a view to where the most risk is and where the most benefit is.
These are more of a step.
A step.
Footpaths raised.
I can
quite a
have a look through
step.
the prioritisation report. I can give you a
I'll send you a photo
Yep.
or something.
Yeah, flick me a photo.
Will do. Yep. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judd. If we just to take a couple of quick points here, but we're out of time. My suggestion is that if we've got any issues that we really want, specific issues that we want Damien to come and talk to us about, we get together and list them, and so that he can come along to the next meeting with a specific number of questions to answer, because I've got a few. But we haven't got time today, and so that is my suggestion for how we really sort out the roading issues, which I think are some of the bigger ones for our board. So that's how we deal with it. But so you're right now, Charlie. You're happy to leave this for next time, Peter?
Just for the next time you appear here, the criteria that you assess footpaths with, you mentioned 5 criteria or 5 priorities. Yeah, I'd like to know the criteria that you use to assess the difference between a 1, a 2, and a 3, and a 4, and a 5. So at what stage does it become a real risk to the footpather or user of it?
Yeah, I can get you that information, Peter. And just further to what the chair reiterated, if it's easier, I'm happy to make some time available between now and the next meeting, acknowledging I think these meetings come around once every 6 weeks or something like that. So if there is more urgent matters that members of the board wish to discuss, I'm happy to make some time, preferably after the end of August when I have to get my programs in, but to NZTA, but I'm certainly happy to make some time to meet with you all together or individually, I don't mind.
Yeah,
happy to.
I just think it's for a clarification for the public that are hearing that how you assess those things. So when they complain, they can realise that it's really a classic 3 or it's 5 or it's that's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, that's not a problem. I'll grab that off the Alliance and I'll circulate it.
Okay, thank you. No, that's really good, and we'll target some specific items for the next meeting. Thank you. So moving on to item, oh no, we have to, I need a mover for the recommendation that we receive the report operation status report roads July 2000. We've got Charlie, Judd, all in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you. So we've got this item from the Civil Defence team.
Thanks. Obviously, just give a bit of context. You are all very used to Tim and Ants turning up as a Civil Defence team. All of council staff have a responsibility for civil defence as well. So in an emergency, we all kind of pivot from our day jobs into a civil defence function. Daryl and I are part of the intelligence function within civil defence, which basically means that we are the nosy people. So we try and get the information that supports other people making decisions, planning operations. One of the things that we observed from Cyclone Gabriel was how much time it took, even with military involvement, to really understand the needs of the communities over there that had become isolated. So the work we are doing at the moment is some pre-mapping around where could our communities become isolated, and then wanting to connect with those communities to understand what their likely needs would be, appreciating that those will vary at different times, at different seasons, and to ground truth what we can kind of tell from looking at maps with what landowners know, because people know their land best. So we are keen to firstly make you aware of the work that we are wanting to undertake with the rural communities, and secondly, find out from you how you would like to be involved in that. We obviously don't have time to cover all of that today beyond kind of the making you aware, but very happy, like Damien, to meet with you, maybe workshop it, meet with individuals or groups to get your information to support this mahi. Yeah. And open to any questions.
Thank you. Have we got any, Peter?
Yes, I do have. It's about being connected in isolation. And are you working with the Joe Buckingham for the digital connection?
So this work will tie in. What we are particularly trying to do at this point in time is to understand those communities, which could be, in the case of a large landholder, a single household, or in other cases, say Aberfeldy, it could be several households that are all kind of connected. So we want to initially understand what those constituents of an isolated community might be, then build up on the different types of needs that people would have. Absolutely, connection is one of them, and we know from events that people can go for a while without having that connection, particularly where people are used to living in a more isolated way, but there is a point for everyone where just that human contact is essential. Being able to tell people you're okay, know that your kids are okay, that is hugely important. So those bits of work will absolutely come into this, but it's not the initial focus.
So how are you gathering this information?
So the work we're doing at this stage is Daryl has large-scale maps. We will use things that we know. So we know where bridges are, we know where significant culverts are, we know that the physical things that might cause a section of the rural community to become isolated. There will be other things that we don't know. So people who own farms know that these hills go and these sorts of events or this happens. They're not necessarily things we can immediately tell from a map, so we want to test what we think we know with people who actually know it on the ground, and build from there. Does that answer your question?
So you'll be contacting the farmers and the landowners personally?
That is a possibility, and that's the kind of information we are keen for your insights on, in terms of what is the best way of doing it and who are the best people to do it. Obviously, we've got people like Colleen at Whanganui Partners that we'll connect in with as well, but certainly see you all as having very strong reach into the rural community, so well placed to either support this work or to give us guidance.
Yeah, it might be a nice article for our hotwire thing or something like that.
Well, I've got an idea that civil defence is a huge topic, and as we've seen from the other coast, and I'd like to organise a workshop specifically on civil defence. And I think my idea at this stage would be that I think myself and one other from the board meet with the relevant people from council to try and come up with an agenda, things that we need to discuss at that workshop. And so any ideas you've got on that, we'll pick them up there and then take them on with the whole board and perhaps any other relevant stakeholders.
So we can certainly take that back to Tim Crow in the first instance. Obviously, he is the civil defence manager, so he would probably, I know he'd be really keen to do this bit of work, but he'd be kind of the primary person to work with. That said, I know I'd be happy to support, and I'm sure that Daryl.
Yeah. So I'd like our board members to think about that. A workshop, but we need a specific set of objectives as to what we achieve with it, and a clear agenda. So, and we'll get that from council staff.
Yes.
But if we can have some, my suggestion is that if you people have any ideas, you feed them to Demelza, and she can get them all together.
Yeah, I think if you've got particular questions that you would like to have answered about civil defence, that's a good way of doing it. And then Tim's probably got some really good ideas about how to shape up a workshop around those.
Yes, and then one of the team was in Hawke's Bay after the one there. So there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of information which is available, and we need to sort of figure out a way of getting it out there.
Yeah, certainly we've got bits and pieces of that information. So I was one of the council staff that went across to the Hawke's Bay, but we know that lots of other people went in lots of different capacities. So we are keen to get all that information and use it to inform the work that's been done within council.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. Just for clarity, are you trying to get information prior to an event? Like, for example, like my geographic position might be at higher risk than, say, Peter's or David's or vice versa. Is that what you're trying to do? I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting.
So what there was after Cyclone Gabriel, there was something like 21 different communities that were identified as isolated pockets. So Lower Dartmoor, Risington, places like that. What we're wanting to do is understand what those equivalents might be in Whanganui, what the needs of the people in those areas might be, so that if an event did happen, we've got that information.
Yeah, okay. In my previous life, I've been quite heavily involved in this stuff, as far as the helicopter pilot goes. So I've got a fair idea, but every event's different. So I was not quite sure how you can plan for an event that hasn't happened yet.
You can plan for, you can kind of work out what's your most realistic worst case scenario and plan for that. You then ground truth that when an event occurs, and respond. So it's never a perfect solution. It doesn't give you all of the answers, but it makes you a bit further along the journey than if you haven't done the legwork now.
It was in 2004 we had a near disaster, and David's neighbour got swept away. Mm-hmm. And it was only by luck we found him, and we had no communication. Communication is the biggest thing. That should be at the top of your list.
Mhm, yeah.
I guess it is.
So that's the reason for my recommendation that we really do target this as a group, this one specific, the civil defence as a specific topic that our board should be putting some
Top of the list.
effort into. And that's where my point is, that we've got Tim and Ant, and we've got a number of people in council who have an input into it. So we should be talking to them, and then our group meeting with them and coming up with exactly what these different groups in council think we need, and where we can fit in with providing it.
May I suggest even Midwest Helicopters, could they be part of that workshop?
Absolutely, that's the whole point. We need to figure out who would be best involved. The other guy who was critical in 2015 was Blair from Downers. He knew where 42 diggers were.
Yeah.
And he got them distributed within hours. It's that sort of planning that I'm thinking of.
Places like Midwest and Downers, Veolia, they are huge parts of any response we do. Absolutely integral.
Okay, thank you. So this, in my view, needs to be ongoing, and I'll have to, now that I think the other way, I'll start to push that. Yeah, I was there exactly 4 years ago today. Okay, so thank you, Kirsty. And I shall now ask for a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation that we receive the report. Thank you, Peter. Seconder, Judd. It's all up there. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that's the end of the agenda. Thank you. Yeah, we've got something else on.
Workshop is at 3:30.
Yes.
We've got a workshop.
So Judd, can I just ask you to?
Certainly, it's Karakia Whakamutunga. Unu he ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wate, kia mama te nākau te tinana. Te waira I te ara takatu. Koia rā e rongo waka irihira aki ki runga. Kia wate, ai rā, kua wate, hau pai mārie. Release us from this mantle of this meeting, so that we may stand free, clear in heart, spirit and body. Make it happen. Peace reign free. Kia ora tata.